Hey H&K fans, James here with another Workbench Wednesday video. This week, instead of talking about H&K weapons, I thought I would spend a little bit of time discussing magazine development, and specifically magazines developed during the 1990s. Now, as the big H&K fans will know, the 90s was a transitional period for the company. They'd been bought out, they'd restructured, and they'd made a conscious decision to step away from the stamped steel weapons that we were all familiar with at that time, and move on to the polymer-based weapons that were now have become the norm for the company. The USP, the G36, UMP, and so on. Now, what they also did was step away from stamped steel construction on the magazines, at least initially, and we've seen that some of those have continued on and others have not. And it's always been interesting to me to find out kind of the reasons and why they did that, as well as the differences between the initial prototypes and early production model magazine development versus the later production of what we're usually most familiar with seeing. And I'm always impressed to see what comes in the shop on a day-to-day basis. Recently I had a friend of mine who brought me some of these early production and prototype magazines for the USP, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to take a closer look at this early design. So, without further ado, I recommend you grab yourself a nice tasty breakfast and meet me over here on the workbench. Okay, so as I mentioned, it was clear that in the 1990s there was a mandate towards that polymer construction, and they used that in their magazine development pretty much across their full line of products. And the one that really kind of sticks out to me the most, even though it wasn't the first developed, was the G36 magazine. Now, that whole weapon system was just so revolutionary, but the magazine itself, with its kind of smoke-colored translucency and the locking lugs on the side, was really iconic and is stuck with us today. And though this is not the first magazine for the HK 416 MR design, it is an early prototype and then issue of polymer construction. And they've come out with a couple other polymer designs since, but this was the first one that we really saw here in the US. And again, it's got that kind of smoke color. We're much more familiar with the early steel magazines. Obviously, this one is a blank firing example from the 416 that they'd actually developed for the SA-80 program for the British and then modified it over. But again, even with that design, there was still an intent to try and make a polymer magazine for it. Another one that's pretty familiar with H&K fans is for the MP5 series. The original 9mm MP5s had stamped steel constructed magazines like this one here, but when they went to the MP5 10 and 40, they went with a polymer design. And as you can see here in this photo of a framed product display I've got here in my office, the original design for that magazine was a polymer design of kind of an amber translucency, and it also had the locking lugs on the side like we saw with the G36 design, but due to reliability issues as far as the strength of those locking lugs and the feed lip area, that original design was abandoned, and what we now have is what everyone is usually familiar with, the 10 and 40, and that's this kind of blue-grayish tint polymer constructed magazine. Now, you can't really see through it like you can some of the other designs. It's too thick. You can definitely tell it's loaded, but you can't see as clearly as you could with the others. And this one is all polymer, base plate, follower, obviously the body. It does have a steel insert up here near the top, and that prevents the feed lips from expanding under fully loaded tension, and also protects the feed lips from being dropped, and we've seen that kind of carry over as well. But the one that most of the civilian customers here in the US are familiar with is the design of the USP magazine. If you had a full-size USP 40 or 9, it came with this thick black polymer constructed magazine, and again, this is the first we'd seen from them. Everything else from pistol magazines had been steel up to that point. And this one, you can see it's got the witness holes in the back that show you how many rounds are in the magazine. But that was the initial design. It's very thick, and I'd always wondered if this was where they started from, because the other magazines we were seeing were this, translucent or semi-translucent material. And like I said, I had a friend of mine who had worked for H&K during the 90s, stopped by and give me a couple of magazines here, and this kind of answers that question for me. And the first one you'll see here, again, is a full-size 9mm USP magazine, and this one has, almost completely clear, maybe smoke-colored, not as dark or as thick as the G36 magazine, but you can definitely see completely through it. You got your witness holes in the back, but they're not holes per se. They're not drilled through. They have the numbers, but they just coincide with the fact that you can see through the magazine to see where those marks are. And you can see that this one has the steel inserts on the top as well. And this was followed by a similar magazine, but now with a little bit thicker and darker type coloring. This is more of a grayish translucency, and if you hold these two in your hands, you can feel that this one is a thicker material than the other one, and I think that adds to the color itself. So otherwise they're the same, but this one, because of the darker texture or darker color, actually has the witness holes punched through it. Okay, it still has the steel insert at the top, but what you'll notice on both of these, if you look closely, is we've got stress fractures here in the back of the magazine and around the top. And so these early development magazines, and my friend tells me that this is what initially came in for testing and development with the first USPs. Clearly they weren't strong enough, okay? So they had to increase the rigidity of the magazine. And what we had seen that followed the release of the USP 9 and 40 was the fact that H&K was also competing for the German service pistol contract, which eventually became the P8, and with the P8 they created a semi-translucent polymer magazine. So this is the magazine from the P8 and the P8A1. You can see that it is more of a milky white construction, and if I hold these up together, it definitely feels thicker, stronger than these two other earlier models. You can see it still has the metal insert feed ramps. This one doesn't have any witness holes in the back because they just expected that you would look through the side, and they didn't want extra dirt and debris to be able to enter inside the magazine. So interesting to see how these things developed as they moved on. But since they had had the issues with these earlier stress fractures on these early development polymer mags, when the US models, the full production models of the 40 and 9 came out, they had made a decision to go with just a solid black polymer magazine instead of what we later saw with the P8. And this same design, not the same magazine, but the same kind of milky white translucency, was what we later saw in the extended magazines for the Jet Funnel 9 and 40, but they have not carried over to any of the other models. And even today, if you buy a full-size USP 9 or 40, you'll still get the original style black magazines. Now, all the other guns from the handgun line from H&K have gone to a steel construction magazine again, including the USP 45 full-size and the compacts, everything that's gone since it. But it's really kind of neat to see what really was the evolution of, these H&K USP magazines from a clear smoke color all the way through to solid black polymer. So there you go. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. As always, I'm humbled by the opportunity to share my knowledge and experience with you guys. If you're in need of H&K service and support, or you're looking for unique training opportunities, give me a shout. That's what I'm here for, guys. Thanks. Take care.